This week's episode is sponsored by Logitech.
You're listening to the B&H Photography Podcast. For 50 years, B&H has been the professional source for photography, video, audio, and more. For your favorite gear, news, and reviews, visit us at bnh.com or download the B&H app to your iPhone or Android device. Now here's your host, Derek Fassbender.
Welcome, listeners. I'm Derek Fassbender, host of the B&H Photography Podcast.
And I'm Jill Waterman, the podcast senior creative producer.
And I'm Mike Weinstein, the show's technical producer and audio engineer.
Photographers have the notable ability to suspend time in every picture they make, creating immersive worlds that deepen into complex stories when woven together in series. In today's show, we'll introduce you to a photographer who's dedicated nearly 50 years to the pursuit of such rarefied time capsules, gaining access to exclusive communities and building a level of trust to allow for intimate portraits. More recently, he's employed the magic of selective focus to capture jewel-like depictions of the world from above. Claudio Edinger is one of Brazil's preeminent photographers. After studying economics at Mackenzie University in Sao Paulo in the early 70s, he turned his attention to photography and hasn't stopped since. Edinger moved to New York City in 1976, and during the 20 years he spent in the U.S., he completed immersive photo essays about the Hasidic community of Brooklyn, the denizens of Manhattan's iconic Chelsea Hotel, and habitués of LA's Venice Beach. He also freelanced for Brazilian and North American publications such as Veja, Time, Life, Rolling Stone, and the New York Times Magazine, among many others. The author of more than 20 books, Edinger's photographs have been collected worldwide and exhibited by institutions such as New York's International Center of Photography, the Los Angeles County Museum of Art, the Maison Européenne de la Photographie in Paris, and the Sao Paulo Museum of Art, to name but a few. Edinger has received many honors for his work, including the Ernst Haas Award, the Hasselblad Award, the Higashikawa Award, and the Leica Medal of Excellence, which he received twice. Always seeking new approaches to his work, Edinger has explored a wide range of camera formats and photographic techniques over the course of his career. In 2000, he began working with a large format camera, using selective focus to approximate human vision, and in 2015, he started an exploration of aerial photography, a theme that continues to this day. Claudio Edinger, welcome to the show.
Wow, thank you so much. I don't think I need to say anything else. It's going to spoil your lovely introduction.
Podcast is over. Hit stop.
Okay,
We're done.
thank you. Thank you all for coming.
Now, Claudio, I want to start before the photography career. You studied economics, and you had barely graduated when your first photo series on the inhabitants of a notorious building in Sao Paulo was exhibited at Sao Paulo's Museum of Art. Did you know back then that those photos would set you on the path to this prolific career?
Actually, while I was studying economics, next door, University of Architecture had a lab. And I used the lab the whole time. For the 3 years that I was studying economics, I'll spend more time doing processing, developing photography, than really doing economics. I graduated because it wasn't a very tough course. But when I graduated, I knew that I wasn't going to go in that direction at all. Economics has helped me to devise strategies of survival. But what I really wanted to do is to go out in the world and take photos. While I was studying economics, I went to New York. I took some photos, and one of the photos won first prize in the competition in the university. And I got a Rolleiflex camera, and that really set me on the path. But the Martinelli building, my very first essay, I knew exactly what I wanted to do. I wanted to go explore the world, try to understand who I am. I'm a Jewish guy who's surrounded by Catholic people in Brazil. And I was born in Rio, but I was raised in Sao Paulo. I had a really difficult time establishing my identity. And I think photography was going to help me with that.
Now, was it this trip to New York while you were studying economics that made you say, I need to go back to New York? Or what caused you to move to New York?
Well, I had a set of goals as a photographer. I wanted to work for the best magazine of Brazil. I wanted to have a show in the museum. I wanted to do several things as a photographer. And in the very first year, I got all of them satisfied. New York was an amazing photographic capital at that time. In 74, ICP was created. Look magazine and Life magazine all came back to life. Everything was happening in New York. So since I had this show in Brazil, I thought, well, I'll take this to New York. And that's that. Of course, once I was in New York, the director of ICP, Cornel Capa, wouldn't even see me. He sent me to his assistant who asked me, where is Sao Paulo? I said, well, it's in Argentina. She says, ah, great. So, this is what I faced when I got there. I thought the doors will open magically as they had before in Brazil. And of course, nothing like that happened. And I was walking in the street and I saw Hasidim. I was hypnotized by him and I follow him like you follow a rare butterfly in the forest. And this butterfly flew all the way to 47th Street. And then when I saw all the Hasidim on 47th Street in New York, I went crazy. And I said, gosh, gotta photograph this. Went back the next day and they almost lynched me because nobody wanted to be photographed. And I was a hippie. I had long hair and a beard. It was really weird. I don't know if I would want to be photographed by me at that time. But one of them said, well, you should go see the Lubavitch group in Crown Heights. So the next day I went to Lubavitch group and they were very receptive. And I got an apartment. And before I knew, I was living among them and I cut my hair short and my beard and I wore a hat and a white shirt and a jacket. I looked like one of them and I got access to everything.
So interesting how you were just taken in and offered the introduction into the community. Most people have to kind of earn their trust. And correct me if I'm wrong, but you barely spoke English at the time.
No, you're absolutely right. I barely spoke English. But the thing is, I dressed like them, and I became friends with one, with two, with three. And I go back home and in my little apartment, I had a dark room and I process the photos. I'll bring the photos back to them and they love that and they introduce me more people. And then I met a couple of Brazilian Hasidim and then we became family. I'll go eat every Saturday at their house, Shabbos, and they introduced me to the whole community. And before I knew, I was speaking English and I was in this community. And before 76 was over, I was deported because my visa as a tourist expired. I tried to renew it and they wouldn't. And they sent me out. I went to Canada. And when I came back, I was able to come back because I had multiple entry visa. I continued working and working and working with them. And finally, I met Philippe Halsman. Philippe was born in the same city as my mom in Riga, Latvia. Philippe was like my long lost uncle. He even said that I was his cousin to Ben Fernandez from the new school who got me a job. He called Cornel Capa, who received me there. Look at the photos I was taking, invited me to have a show at ICP. I was barely 25. So things just happen.
Being in the right place.
I do believe that, Joe. If you follow your natural ability, the world will conspire in your favor. And that's what happened to me. It wasn't easy, never. Up to today, it's not easy. But magically, things keep happening.
So I'm curious about your Hasidic series. The pictures are very unposed. It's just slices of life. How much time did you spend actually taking the pictures versus just passively observing what was going on? and making people comfortable.
It doesn't have a rule, you know. Some places I just went and took pictures. Some places I couldn't take pictures because it was Shabbos. But they tried to convert me to Hasidim, and I went along. I never put film, which is something the Hasidim wear, one in the head, one in the arm, trying to unite mind and heart. I like that concept. I do meditation, and I've done it for many, many years. From that time, I had no problem saying the prayers in Hebrew. I think Hebrew is a very fantastic language, you know, to pray. And I like Sanskrit also, which is a sister language. And gradually they saw me putting the tefillin in. I gained their confidence more and more and more, you know. And some situations I just went in and bam, took photos. And some others I had to wait all day, you know. I made a living at that time taking pictures for Brazilian magazines. And also, I did Hasidic weddings, so that helped me too.
Wow.
Yeah.
Were there any situations that you weren't able to photograph? Was there a line drawn?
Yeah, on Shabbos, I was never able to carry my camera. So I would go to the beach, to Coney Island. I wear my Hasidic outfit, and underneath I had a bathing suit. I go other places, you know, or I'll process photos in my studio, in my house. But then I realized that the Lubavitch were just a small part of the Hasidic community of New York. So I went to Williamsburg, and that's the toughest place on earth to take photos. They rather be thrown out of the Brooklyn Bridge than be photographed, you know. But gradually I met one, I met another, and then I went to Borough Park, where they had the Bobov group, which is sort of in between. You know, the Lubavitch and the Satmar, they used to fight each other, punch each other, because the Lubavitch were in favor of Israel and the Satmar were against. So they will fight.
Wow.
It's complex, you know.
And how long were you photographing the Hasidim?
For 2 years.
When do you know you're done? Is it something that you're photographing to put together a series? What was the end goal?
Well, I think from the beginning I want to do books. But I think it's an organic movement. When you're taking photos, you keep bringing new stuff that excites you and gets to a point where you don't do it anymore. You don't get interesting stuff anymore. And then you know you got to move to another place. Then I met Philippe, and he introduced me to Ben Fernandez, as I mentioned, and he invited me to teach at the new school. And I couldn't live in Brooklyn and teach at the new school. So that's how I end up going to the Chelsea Hotel, which is close by. It was all organic, you know.
Now, Philippe being a master portraitist,
Yes.
what did you learn from this relationship? What did you take forward in your work?
Well, I was so blessed with him because he invited me to take his 12-week course on psychological photography. The last thing I wanted to do was to do portraits. It wasn't in my plans, but I took the course and I loved it. And I discovered that I am a natural portraitist. For 15 years, I paid my bills doing covers for all major magazines and doing stories and photographing executives, which I think is the hardest subject to photograph a man behind a desk and make it interesting. So these are great challenges that help me very much to expand my vocabulary as a photographer.
Was there an approach or something that you saw? I mean, obviously you said it. It's very boring to photograph an executive sitting behind a desk. Was there an approach that you found, something that worked for you, that you said, I can transform this, I can find joy in this and make these images my own?
Sure, sure. First of all, as an economist talking to an executive, I was curious about many, many aspects of their lives. So we got along because I wanted to know more about them and what brought them to this moment. But I realized that one of the best things to do with an executive is to get him out of the office, you know, get him to the roof, get him to the entrance of the building, get him to the middle of the streets, I photographed an executive of a place where they wrap boxes around with saran wrap. And I say, hey, I want to do you wrapped around saran wrap. And the guy says, no, no way. I says, please, let's do it. Look, I'm going to have my assistant. I put my assistant there and they wrapped him. And he looks fabulous, it's totally different. And I convinced them to do what I wanted, just saying, look, if you put a boring photo, nobody's going to read your piece. But if you put that very interesting photo next to your text, people say, well, what's going on here? And they read your piece, That's what photos in magazines are for anyway. So I got a lot of people to do crazy stuff.
Now, I want to take that conversation there because crazy stuff, the Chelsea Hotel, this is a place that iconic slice of New York history. You had really what New York was at the time, artists and outsiders and people that you probably felt more comfortable around these people than your time in Brooklyn, I would say.
Absolutely true. But I was somewhere in between because I prized my spiritual life. And I was living with a very spiritual community. Despite everything else, they were a very spiritual group. And as a hippie, I was looking for a community. We all were looking for communities where people thought like we can live together and it would be great fun. So I thought. The Hasidim were very nice in a spiritual way. And the Chelsea was just the opposite. The first time I went to the Chelsea, I said, I don't want to live here. Forget it. People were checking in handcuffs. People were checking in fully leather outfit for S&M. I said, forget it. I don't want to be here. But I couldn't find a place and I fell in love with the building. The building is really fantastic, the Chelsea. So I end up not finding a better place and I moved there. But I didn't move there to do a book on the hotel. I wasn't aware of the extent of insane people that we had inside that place. If you put a fence around it, it would be on the asylum easily. But naturally, I begin to meet people and I went over my own prejudices. And with time, I loved it. I had many, many good friends.
So the Chelsea Hotel pictures are very different than the previous series on the Hasidic community. They're environmental portraits. They're very much posed. Was that approach influenced by your connection to Philippe Halsman?
Oh, for sure. But every project that we undertake requires a certain strategy. And in the Chelsea Hotel, I lit all the places. Every room became my studio. It's related to the commercial work I was doing too. But every project I do, a lot of things change. With the Hasidim, I never used the flash because I didn't believe in flash.
Right.
You go to these periods. In the Chelsea, I used flash the whole time. Venice Beach was a continuation of that research in the Chelsea Hotel. And then from there, I went to India and I started shooting square format color with flash. And from India, I went to the Insane Asylum, which is square format with flash. Every project has a different strategy. I like to compare photography with medicine. You have surgeons, doctors, general clinics, specialists in throat, in voice, in lungs, in legs. You have all kinds of special doctors. And photographers are the same. We have a lot of photographers who are specialists. And my specialty is to discover the cure for cancer. That's what I'm after. I'm a researcher. I'm in a lab. My whole life, I've been researching, trying to discover new ways of saying things, new ways to photograph. My work is like that. Every project has a different approach. Following a line, I'm open to whatever the universe brings my way, but the universe has to conspire in your favor. My whole life has been like that. I've been guided. My intuition brings me to places, and the place drags me into it. If that happens, I'll go anywhere.
You are a big admirer of the German portrait photographer August Sander.
Yes.
And he had a belief that isolated images only mean something in a series. The work you have done is very in-depth, series-oriented. Do you seek out picture opportunities as building blocks in a series, or does that happen after the fact?
It happens automatically, like magic. It's really hard to explain. But what I'm really interested, Jill, is in intimacy. I think intimacy is what makes a photograph work or not. I'm looking for universal images. I don't want to have particular images. For me, a particular image is an image that makes sense for you and me, and that's it. A photo of your family, they make sense to you. I'm not interested in that. Of course, I use that and it's fun, but I'm really interested in something that you can look at it and look at it, put it on your wall, and for years you keep looking at it, and for years it gained meaning. That's what I call universal image.
When you're trying to capture intimacy in a portrait session with a subject, how does the technical aspects of lighting a scene and, bringing flash or equipment into the scene affect that ability to gain intimacy?
It makes what you want to do easier, makes the way you make the person relax easier. When you look at a person, you say, this is her look. Of course, it's very subjective, but in my case, whatever it is that's there, I try to capture that soul. Gene Smith was asked, do you use available light? He says, yes, whatever light is available, candles, flashlights. I'll follow that school. Whatever I feel will help to get that expression, to get that feeling, to get that soul of the person in the image, I will use.
Now, how much comes from feeling and how much comes from knowing your subject and knowing something about them? You've talked about you're a researcher. You want to know your subjects. Does that trump the feeling, or is it more about the feeling?
No, it helps. It helps. It's important. It's a combination. That's why I lived in the Chelsea for 5 years, because I photograph a person. Sometimes it's not what I wanted. And I go back and do it again, and I go back and do it again as many times as necessary. Yes, knowing the person is very, very important. When I photographed things, say, in asylum, I lived inside the asylum because that gave me more intimacy with whatever was happening inside there.
Mm. And photographing a community from the outside, when you're trying to embed yourself in a community, do you feel it was more important for you to become one or for them to accept you? Where was the harder part of the equation, for them accepting you or you to embed yourself and become comfortable as a photographer in that situation?
I think it's a mix of both. I have been trained from the start, for whatever intuitive reason, to see everybody as friends. I don't see strangers. I'm in the metro. There are no strangers next to me. I will talk to anybody that I feel like I want to talk to. And I've exercised that my whole life. Up to now, my daughter sometimes get embarrassed when she's with me anywhere in the supermarket because I talk to everybody. I love to talk to people. I think they all are part of my family. That's how I see it. I'm not just saying this. I feel this way.
That's a great advantage as a photographer.
Yeah.
That's what I wanted to say. Before becoming a photographer, I studied acting.
Huh.
Interesting.
Because I felt like I had a certain ability to be an actor, and maybe that's where life was going to take me. I could use that as a photographer, I thought, to be able to become everything you can be, with whoever you are.
Yeah. Inhabit roles of different people.
Exactly.
Yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, it's really about relating. There's an equation to every interaction. Everybody has their own, equation solely. And then you have situational, where if I meet the right person at the wrong time, the equation might not jive, but you have to kind of find what works for you. And I can imagine as a photographer, that's, again, going back to your research, it's problem solution at that point. You have to find what connects you to that person.
Exactly.
What is the angle? How do I get comfortable with them? How do I make them comfortable with me? And then how do I capture their essence
Exactly.
in photo?
Exactly.
Now, that said, I mean, you have a storied career, Claudio. There has to be things that you've learned or have kind of progressed in your process over time. How has your research changed? How has the way you work with your subjects changed over time? And what is something, if you could go back and talk to your young self, that you would advise young photographer Claudio on?
Look, I've done everything I wanted. Nothing kept me from doing what I wanted. I wanted to photograph New York. For example, I was teaching a course of 12 weeks at ICP, the photographic project. And people wouldn't come with interesting images. And then I thought to myself, is it really possible to do anything in 12 weeks? So I decided to take photos myself of New York. I knew my time in New York was coming to an end, and I wanted to bring with me some images of New York, but not normal New York. It was black and white, it was a square format. There was a lot of selective focus. So this is how things develop for me. Something happens in one essay that's not exactly part of that essay, but it will bring fruition in the next project. So I did this essay of New York called Cityscapes. It's a book. And then my selective focus was getting really mature, to the point when I moved to Brazil and I bought a 4x5 camera and I shot for 12 years with a 4x5 camera because you can do the tilt shift. You can create the selective focus. And that's where I really found myself. I think when I start shooting with selective focus, that's when I realized this is what I'm here for. And why is it so important to me? Because that's the way we all see the world. I did a book called The Paradox of Seeing, because we see everything focused and unfocused. We're talking now, you're looking at a microphone, and whatever you're looking at, that's in focus. Everything else is out of focus. So if we're talking about intimate photography, the selective focus is the most intimate imagery I think you can produce. If you produce an image that totally focused, that's fake. That's the camera. The camera sees everything focused, but your eyes, they see everything with selective focus. So I believe that everything that I've done prior to this was to take me to the selective focus.
Now, that is something we're definitely going to dive into, but it seems like a great time to take a break. So we're going to stand up, stretch, shake it out. If you're already standing, have a seat or meditate, something that Claudio's into. And when we come back, we'll continue our conversation with Claudio Edinger.
Stay tuned.
The Logitech Mevo Core is a live streaming camera that captures up to 4K video at 30 frames per second with high-quality audio. Wirelessly connect multiple Mevo cameras and stream directly to your favorite platform with the Mevo Multicam app. With a compact design and up to 6 hours of battery life, you can create anywhere. Head on over to bnh.com for more information about the Logitech Mevo Core or use the link in our podcast show notes.
Okay, we are back in here talking with Claudio Edinger. Now, Claudio, before the break, we focused on your early photo series, but you started to talk about this switch over to using a Hasselblad in your commercial portrait assignments to get better image quality. But this also meant shifting from rectangular format to square frame. Now, what effect did this have on your process when you were composing your images?
When I did the Insane Asylum, I figured that was the best possible format. The square, predictable, boring. When somebody's boring, you say, oh, that's such a square.
Uh,
Because it's so obvious, it's so predictable. When you photograph the insanity inside the asylum, we have no idea. Why are they like that? I end up going to the insane asylum because my grandmother was with Alzheimer's. She lived with us, and I lived in New York. And I would come and I'll spend time with my family here. And my grandmother, one year I come and she's in bed wearing diapers. It was very shocking to me. And then I saw on TV a documentary about this insane asylum with 3,500 patients divided in 9 pavilions. Some were women, some were men, some were really violent and dramatic patients, and they all drugged. And I went there and I somehow got permission to photograph inside. I still don't know how, but I did. So the square and the flash worked beautifully because it was total unpredictable situation inside the total predictable format, and none of them got visit from their family because they were like so out, and the families have hard time handling it, and most of them didn't recognize the family anyway. And I use a flash to bring attention to them, almost put them on a stage. That's what occurred to me when I did that.
How did they receive the images?
Every photo I took, because I was using flash mixed with ambient light, I used the Polaroid. And I'll show them the Polaroid. Most of them didn't recognize themselves in the Polaroid because I don't think they have mirrors in the place. But they liked that I was there paying attention to them. A lot of them will cling to me physically. They'll put their bodies next to mine, like, we're happy that you were here because somebody was paying attention to them.
So interesting. And did the Hasselblad change your relationship to your portrait subjects? Was there something that was more intimate or anything that changed in the connection?
Well, actually, the Hasselblad, you have to use it on a tripod, which is something I didn't use before. And some of them I directed, of course. And portraits, you have to direct them all. It worked really well for me.
Even when were lighting portraits, you would use a tripod with the Hasselblad?
Yes.
Wow.
Yes. But I have the flash. It wasn't on top of the camera. The flash was in one of my hands.
Right.
So I'll light them from the side. I'll light them from above. I light them from below. I like to vary the light.
Yeah. What kind of flash were you using with the Hasselblad?
Portable Vivitar 285.
Yep.
And then after 2 years, the asylum didn't let me in anymore. And I was in Brazil and I had a lot of film and I wanted to continue that research. So I went to Rio and I photographed Carnival. One is the insanity inside an institution, in the other, institutionalized insanity. Everybody goes absolutely nuts in our country. And I used the same style, the same technique to photograph Carnival, which most of the time was done in color. I did it in black and white with the flash.
Wow.
Interesting.
And I spent 2 years in St. Asylum, 5 years in Carnival.
And you were photographing the Carnival in different regions of Brazil.
Exactly.
Is there differences in how Carnival is celebrated?
Oh, yeah. Very, very different. There is no one Brazil because we're such a mixture of everything, natives and Africans and Germans and Italians and Portuguese. We're such a mixture of all those things. Every region of Brazil has a different personality, so to speak. And Carnival in different regions is like that. For instance, 1 million Japanese live in São Paulo,
Wow.
and they have their own Carnival ball.
Do you have a favorite region for Carnival?
Oh, I think the best one is where I was born in Rio. Rio is really off the charts. If I may, I will tell you a short story. In 1983, the New York Times sent me to Rio to photograph the bankruptcy of Rio. And one of the things I needed to do is to photograph Carnival, because one of the official parades where they have different schools of samba, they all put on a show,
Right, right.
and they parade during 2 nights. And I've seen all this. I've seen it on TV. Why do I need to go to Carnival? I thought, forget it. But okay, gotta do my job. I'm gonna go. I hired a taxi and said, look, it starts at 8. At 8:30, I'm leaving. So you wait for me. I'll pay for your time. He said, oh, okay, no problem. I got there 7:45, and about 8, the school of samba got in, and that music, the audience, the costume, everything
Mm-hmm.
moved me so much I start crying
Oh.
Yeah.
because it was so amazing that these people were so thrilled, so excited for this to happen. And it was like, I was thrilled, I was excited, I got in a vibe, I was
Mm-hmm.
totally carried away. I went and I told the taxi driver, look, I don't think I'm going to leave now. Please, thank you very much. So I got in at 8 at night. I stayed until 9 in the morning.
Wow.
In 1983, I wasn't planning on doing Carnival or anything, but that thing touched me so much. It was so much a part of me that I didn't know I had.
Mm.
Even talking about it, I get emotional. So go back to 1991 when I went to Rio to photograph Carnival. And it was very much part of who I am.
Is there anything in your photos of Carnival that you notice a difference in because of that energy and because of what you felt?
Well, I don't know if I'm able to pinpoint this. Maybe you, looking at them, you'll be able to pinpoint more.
I'm wondering if there's a connection that you feel between the selective focus idea that you're so taken with in a still photograph and the immersion that happens in life in the midst of Carnival, in the midst of all that performing and activity.
Well, I think the connection is the flash.
Right.
The flash
Mm.
brings out whatever it lights. And usually, when I mix with the ambient light will be subdued, and the flash will bring whatever it is forward. And that in itself is already my selective focus beginning to happen.
Using slow sync flash and all.
Sometimes, yes, sometimes.
Yeah, because that really makes interesting stuff happen.
A little movement in the back, yeah.
Yeah.
Now, I want to move to your assignment work. And a lot of this work involved celebrity and business portraits. Did your approach to your photo sessions change based on the person or what their status was or even the type of work they did?
Yeah, of course. You respond to who is in front of you. But I think we should note right now that for 2 years I worked as a paparazzi in New York. And that helped me a lot doing commercial work because you had to be really fast. You had to do things really fast. And that's a characteristic of portraiture of businessmen. They don't have any time for you. Celebrities, even less. I did a portrait of Woody Allen that took me 30 seconds,
Wow.
6 frames. He says, okay, you have it. Thank you. Ciao. And left.
Yeah, and this has to be such a departure from a portrait photographer who has time to sit there and has time to research and has time to set up exactly how they want to set up. And with a paparazzo, you're just worried about getting a shot.
Well, the paparazzo in New York is not the one you across the street with the long lens waiting for people to leave the restaurant. No. Paparazzo in New York, they have a set time where they all going to be there, and you and your brothers and sisters from the paparazzi world will be elbowing each other one next to the other to do the photo. That's the New York paparazzi. So you understand a little better who I am. I went to photograph the war in El Salvador. in 1983. And when I got to the war, I felt really at home. That's my temperament. I'm a war photographer. I always will be a war photographer. I have a lot of friends who died, but luckily I was protected and I wasn't sent to a war ever again. But when I got to the war, I would go to bed at 2, get up at 5, completely on. Completely on. I said, this is it. This is where I belong. So I'm a war photographer.
What makes you a war photographer? What was compelling about that environment, and how do you understand that?
Well, first of all, your life is at risk every minute. I love that. I live there. I'm completely prepared to die any second. I'm not afraid of death. On the contrary, I think it'll be a great experience. The fact that your life is by a thread the whole time, that's something that I like. In reality, everybody's life is by a thread, but we don't realize that. But in a war, you're really conscious of that. So there is a certain urgency of living that I really appreciate. I don't know. Maybe I was a professional killer in a past life. I don't know.
Or professional dyer?
Professional dyer.
How did you come to take part in the war? Was it an assignment?
It was an assignment. It was a cover of a Brazilian magazine, like Time magazine of Brazil.
And how long were you there?
I was there for a couple of weeks. Not enough time, obviously.
Yeah, it's quite a jump from paparazzi in New York to El Salvador, but maybe not. Maybe there's some continuity there.
Well, to be honest with you, I wasn't happy being a paparazzi at all. But I needed to pay the bills. And Gamma Liaison was an agency, and that's what they offer. And I knew to get inside magazines, and the strategy worked at the end. You get to work for the agency. And they said, well, the only opening we have is for a paparazzi. How's that? And I immediately said, no, thank you. See you later. But then I thought about it. I said, you know what? I'll take it.
So it became a stepping stone to better things.
Absolutely. I didn't expect it. I thought it was like a way to pay for my bills, but it was a fantastic lesson. The agility you have to have with the flash, with your equipment, and also how you deal with the other guys, and how the other guys deal with you. In the beginning, I was Brazilian. Nobody respected me, but I had to make myself respected.
How did you channel, or did you channel the feeling of constant excitement, exhilaration, like that fight or flight response? And I know you're into meditation. Were you meditating at the time when you were photographing the war? Did that help, or were you?
Oh, yeah. I've been meditating since 75. It's going to be 50 years now.
Wow.
I don't know how people survive without it. It's just so fantastic. If you think that we have 27 trillion cells in our bodies, and that's it, you ignore them. And when you meditate, you start working with your 27 trillion cells. Gradually you begin to light them. And we're made of energy, baby. We're made of energy.
I mean, yeah, there's a direct tie. Photography is an art. We have to tap in to our peace. We have to tap into our creativity, and clearing our mind, clearing our soul, our body makes us a better artist.
Absolutely.
Now, I want to dive forward. Year 2000, you started working with a large format camera. So you moved up to the Hasselblad, to the medium format. Now you're moving to a large format camera.
I used the Toyo to start. Toyo is a Japanese brand that we had in Brazil with 2 lenses. Again, I was home when I start shooting with the 4x5. It's really slow. It's really deliberate. When you press the button, the photo has been taken already many, many minutes before. It takes 15 minutes to set a camera, and you need a loop to focus.
How were you maneuvering the 2 lenses, your use case scenarios? Was it the intimacy of the wider angle that you leaned into, or how did you use both of those lenses in your different work?
Well, to be honest with you, most of the time I use the wide angle, the small tele. I use mostly for portraits, but most of the time I use the wide angle.
I'm interested with this use of selective focus. You had talked about how even the flash creates a selective focus.
Yes.
I want to talk about the selective focus as far as depth of field is concerned, and this large format camera allowing you to explore this selective focus. When did the selective focus, as it relates to really creating that tilt shift look and that shallow depth of field, when did that assert itself in your work?
If I look back, I would say that I always wanted to do that. By the time I started using the flash in the Chelsea Hotel, I was separating the subject from the back, and I always wanted to do that. You understand what the tilt shift is, right? The 4x5 camera is like a box. It has the part where you put a film and has the front where you put the lens. If they are parallel, everything is in focus. If you angle it, the back and the front, you create the selective focus, tilt, shift.
And what drew you to that in your work?
Well, I think I've been looking for intimacy, as I mentioned before, my whole life. And this way to look and see things relates to the way we look and see things, selective focus. And for me, going further on that idea, the fact that we see everything in focus and out of focus at the same time, it relates to the way our lives are so ambiguous, so paradoxical. We have night and day, we have love and hate, we have war, peace. We always playing with this dichotomy in the world. And when you're able to bring that to an image, I think for me, it reveals what the world is all about, what I am all about. I am totally full of contradictions, like any normal person. And that way to photograph the world is to show in a subtle way, look, we all very contradictory. It's part of life.
Yeah, I think that's such an interesting dynamic, both from a philosophical standpoint and a physical standpoint of you're emulating how we see the world, which is so difficult to do. You really have to know your equipment and
There is a German philosopher named Wittgenstein. And this German philosopher says there are two ways to face the world: the way of the unhappy and the way of the happy. And the way of the unhappy, you go with the fluctuations of the world, Now you're happy, now you're unhappy, now you love, now you're out of love, now you need money, now you have money. You go to the fluctuations of the world, and there is the way of the happy. The happy looks at everything from the eternal point of view. You look at this ball like you're watching it from the air. That's how I end up going to the air. Because in the air, the selective focus, gosh, is an absolute natural. But it relates to this philosopher, trying to look at the world from the point of view of eternity. From down here, we're in the middle of this horrible traffic, congestion. It's all, yeah. But when you go up there, it's beautiful. It's like a choreography, the cars moving. And I think it has to do a lot with that. The spiritual life that I follow end up leading me towards this way.
So you started taking aerial photos and going up in a helicopter.
Well, the large format camera had a validity date. By 2012, it was almost impossible to find film.
Oh,
Almost impossible to develop it.
Yeah.
almost impossible to scan it. It was so much work. And then one day in Paris, I was taking pictures with a large format camera. And usually I use a Polaroid because there's so many variables. I want to make sure once I shoot the photo, everything is in accordance to what I want. But I ran out of Polaroids. But I had a brand new iPhone. And I took a photo with the iPhone. And then I look at the photo and said, that's not possible. My iPhone photo looks better than the one with the 4x5 camera. So that lit a lamp over my head, you know. And in 2012, when everything was running out, I bought a digital camera.
Wow.
That was your first digital camera?
My very first.
What camera was it?
It was a Canon 5D Mark II, I think. Okay. And because I had that camera, I could take aerial photography.
Right.
Because the 4x5, I had to do like Steichen, you know, I have to attach the camera to the bottom of the plane. It just wouldn't work.
Unwieldy.
You change films and forget about it, you know? Yeah. So the digital camera was perfect. Perfect. And then I had a collector friend of mine who was sponsoring it. Most of my books are sponsored by the people that like my work or like my work. And in exchange, they get a print. And he says, you know, I don't want any prints from the book. And I was hurt. I said, well, we did the book. You probably, yeah, hello. But he says, I want a photo of the Maracanã soccer stadium. And I said, what's interesting about the soccer stadium? And then I thought about it. I said, okay, fine. I'm going to rent a helicopter and I'm going to do a photo of it. And that's how it started.
Huh.
I took a photo of the Maracanã Stadium, which was really nice from above with the sun against it. But then I continued and I did incredible photos of Rio with the digital camera. And that's how my series of aerial photography started. You know, it shows you all my life has been like this. I wasn't planning on going and doing it. Things were just taking me in their arms, you know. Yeah.
That's a great way to describe it.
Oh, it's fun. It's so much fun. We think we control everything. We control nothing, you know. And photography is such a power in nature. Once you attach to it, it takes care of you.
And I think that rolling with it, so many people get caught up in, I have to keep the same style. My work has to be cohesive.
You know, I think there is argument for everything. Like, I love the work of Minkinen. I don't know if you're familiar with him.
Yeah, Arno.
No, he does amazing work. He came to Brazil to do a lecture, and he says, people look at my photos, they don't know if it was done yesterday or in 1974 when I started, you know. He continued that research. I admire that.
So just to give some background, his work is all self-portraiture. He's very, very tall and thin with these incredible arms and legs and limbs. Every picture he makes abstracts his body, usually against nature. Sometimes he'll do urban stuff too, but...
And it's all of the piece.
Yeah.
Since his beginning.
Yeah.
Right. Wow. Oh, by the way, in these aerial pictures, because you're not using a tilt shift camera, you're using the digital SLR.
Right.
How are you achieving the tilt shift effect?
Well, Photoshop keeps evolving, and they came out with the selective focus inside Photoshop, but I use ON1 Photo Raw. It's a program like Photoshop. So, hello. I have no problem with that.
Were you visualizing the image before you took it? I mean, when you're using post-processing.
After 12 years using the 4x5 camera, I don't see everything in focus anymore. I only see in selective focus. So when I take a photo, it's unnatural because in not every photo you take, it's going to work as a selective focus. There's a particular way of doing it. Once you study 12 years with a 4x5 camera, it becomes automatic. You know what really works and what doesn't.
Now, we talked about your work from a helicopter, and Some of your work has been made using a drone. Obviously, a lot easier to get your hands on and to navigate than a helicopter. Can you talk about that transition and the differences in working,
With a drone,
yes, with the drone?
depending on the place, if I spend 1 hour in a helicopter, I come with lots of photos. With a drone, it's much more difficult. Most of the time, you have to go to a certain place because the drone has a certain limited autonomy. It's good. I like using a drone. I already destroyed 7. So, yeah, it's part of the learning process, you know.
What drones do you use?
I use mostly DJI.
Are you using the smaller, like the mini series?
Yeah, I have a larger one, a Mavic 3, the Hasselblad camera, but I prefer to use the small 4. This is the latest now. But it's so fragile. The first day I took it out, I hit a door of my friend's house and destroyed it. So I went bought another one. You have to have 2 of those. But the problem with this Mavic 3 is too big. I like this little guy here. If it falls on somebody's head, God forbid, nothing really will happen. You know, I had one fall on my head and nothing happened. But the number 3, that can do damage. That's a tough one. That can cut you.
You talked about how with shooting the large format, at a certain point, you already see things in selective focus. With aerial photography, I mean, I fly a drone as well, and it's hard to know what you're looking at until you're up there. And then you're on the clock because the battery doesn't last forever.
Right.
How do you plan out what you're going to photograph when you don't know exactly how everything is going to look unless you've flown up there before?
The same way you do when you fly with a helicopter. You don't know what it's going to look like. But the thing is, aerial photography is such a different angle than our normal lives. Most things work.
Mm-hmm.
But, you know, I have a particular way of working. I like either early morning or late afternoon. So that light by itself helps things look more interesting.
Right.
All things being equal, cost wise, and everything was on the same plane, helicopter versus drone, what would you prefer?
Helicopter.
Helicopter?
Oh, yeah. Hands down. Plus, I have a Fujifilm GFX, the 100 megapixels. The quality of that is unbeatable.
Yeah, I was going to ask about that. I mean, look, I know we shouldn't get caught up in megapixels and all that stuff, but there is a certain quality. And when you're shooting with the drone, most drone cameras are not at the resolution required to really get the full grasp of what you're photographing, especially from the air.
Yeah, but nowadays, those programs, they make everything. You don't need to have the super duper quality original anymore, you know?
Are you referring to stuff like the oversampling software and super resolution options? And
Yeah. When I print my books, I go to the print shop here in Brazil, and the guy is a wizard. He's a wizard. Photos that are not so sharp, he can make them so incredibly sharp. We have many tools. You guys want to buy a Fujifilm GFX? But it's been like this my whole life. I'd rather have an interesting image
Yes.
with not so good resolution than to have a really great resolution of something that means nothing, you know? So,
Yeah. I mean, if you look at the cameras now, the worst digital camera is light years ahead of most of the cameras that were around 30 years ago. And I think that puts it in perspective what you're saying. If you don't have the content, if you don't have the depth and the interest in an image and the subject and really putting all the other pieces together, then the technology doesn't really do much for you.
yeah. And, you know, you can always do a little print and photograph that print with the large format camera. There's so many ways to do it.
Claudio, I'm interested in, when I look at these tilt shift pictures, I'm sort of an amateur in this whole space. And when those things came online, I played around with them and I saw immediately the miniaturization effect that happens when you apply selective focus on anything. It sort of becomes toy looking or model airplane or model city looking. How did you apprehend that effect? And how do you deal with the fact there's, a degree of novelty there that may run counter to this idea that you had originally of this is the way human beings resolve reality? Because when I'm looking at stuff around this office right now, it doesn't appear miniature to me. So there's this sort of interesting kind of
Okay, that goes back to Wittgenstein, looking at everything from the point of view of eternity.
Mm.
Whoever created this ball that floats in space, how does he see the world? And to have that perspective that in reality, everything, it's miniature. We're all miniatures, we're little tiny things, dust. We're ants. That's the reality. That's the reality. We are a bunch of ants.
Now, you were talking about the advances and where we're at now with the oversampling and upscaling of images. And you had noted in an article about the growth of photography in the 20th century. And you referred to the 21st century as photography's age.
Yes.
Where do you see photography going? Are you happy with where it's going? And specifically
Yes.
with AI?
I am absolutely thrilled. Photography is the painting of the 21st century. Oh, but now it's not. But no, we're 25 years old,
Mm.
It will happen. I love this story. When I lived in New York in 1987, John Paul Getty wanted to start a photo department in his museum in Los Angeles. He came to New York and he talked to a man named Daniel Wolf. In 1987, there were 5 photo galleries in New York. So Getty says, look, I want to start a photo department. And what do I need? And Daniel Wolf calculated, he said $25 million. Getty says, that's it? He said, yeah, that's it. So he bought 3,000 of the best photos available at that time, 1987. 30 years later, how much was that collection worth? Over $2 billion.
Wow.
Okay? 5 galleries in 87. How many galleries do you think there are in New York today? I would say close to 200, 100. Doesn't matter because art galleries also have their photo department, photographers like never before.
Right.
Like never before. Today, there are about 100 museums exclusively dedicated to photography in the world. I know that because I want to start a Brazilian museum of photography. And this is just the beginning. This is just the beginning. And that's true because every single day you see new work coming out on Instagram, on Facebook, on galleries, on newspapers. Every day you have new people doing amazing things.
Now, I'm curious about your thoughts on AI, and in particular, AI, big, wide, broad subject, but in terms of imaging and people now using AI to create these hybrid pieces of photography art. How do you feel about that?
When digital camera first appeared, I thought, boom, this is nothing. I thought so. It's not going anywhere. Nobody that really mattered at that time was doing digital work. No interesting work was coming out from it when it appeared. And then gradually people were maturing to the media and amazing things happened. And the same will be true about AI. It's another tool. And AI doesn't do anything by itself, okay? AI needs an artist to direct it. And if you have an artist that understands, it's in the beginning right now. I am sure we'll have amazing things with AI. Maybe one day I will use AI. Who knows? I didn't have any plans to use digital cameras, really didn't. But then all of a sudden, there it was. It's just the beginning. I think AI will be incorporated in photography for sure. It's already incorporated, but it will be totally incorporated. Fine. There's no problem with that. As long as you have the agent. And if you have an agent, it will work. I'm sure it will work.
I love that approach, your whole go with the flow mentality. I mean, it is something that has.
Yeah, look, I didn't make this planet.
Right.
I had nothing to do with it. I just happened to be walking on its back. Whoever made this planet, whoever put this ball together knows exactly. That's why nothing bothers me.
So what's next for you? We know you just came back to Brazil from an
Yeah.
exhibition at the Leica Gallery in New York.
I have many projects cooking. I did a history book of photography. It was so much fun, such a great pleasure to do, because I teach since 79, and I noticed in Brazil, we have a lot of talent, but we don't have culture. So I said, well, okay. And I start collecting little bits and pieces, and I start posting on Facebook. And before I knew, I said, hey, I have a book. And I put together a history book. I'm not an intellectual. I put it from the photographer's point of view. And I love poets. I study poets. I think every photographer should study poetry because there's so many fabulous poets, and they have so much to do with what we do. And I love philosophers. I study a lot of the philosophers. And I love saints. For instance, Padre Pio, I don't know if you heard the story of Padre Pio, is a saint from Italy that during the Second World War, the Americans went to bomb his city in Italy, and he appeared in the air. And he made them drop the bombs in the forest, made the planes go around. And who tells the story is not Padre Pio, it's the general commander. There is a photo of Padre Pio with all these pilots. They went to meet him afterwards. And he looked at them and said, you're the guys that wanted to destroy my village. There are a lot of saints. I love them. And I collect them. I want to publish that as a book soon. Of course, it's called Philosophers, Poets, and Saints.
Interesting.
It has about 100 and something names that already have the stories ready.
And will there be photographs connected with?
Of course. If you look at my Instagram, once in a while I post like 12 of them, just to see what I have and what's going on. The problem with Instagram, there is a limitation of how many words you can put in. So some I can definitely use more words, but I think it's fun.
That's great.
Yeah.
Where can our listeners find out more about you? Your website, Instagram, other sites?
Yeah, ClaudioEdinger.com.
Okay.
It's my site.
Mm-hmm.
But I use Instagram a lot. Instagram is a great lab, You post things so you understand what you're doing,
Mm-hmm.
I love that. It's a revolution. I think the revolution has come. Everybody has a camera in their pockets, Walter Benjamin said that an alphabet of the future is no longer who cannot read or write, is who cannot understand a photograph. He said that. How about that?
Wonderful. Well, those links will be in our show notes.
Okay. Thank you.
Claudio, thank you.
No, thank you for inviting me. That's really a great pleasure. I love talking about this stuff.
And we love hearing about it. It's great to get inside the mind of the artist and really hear what drives you and what motivates you to create great work. So we want to send a huge thank you to you again.
Thank you.
To all of our listeners out there, thank you so much for joining us today. If you are a fan of the show but are not yet a subscriber, please head on over to Apple Podcasts, Spotify, B&H's YouTube channel, or wherever you get your podcasts and click subscribe. You can also find us on the Explorer blog, where we post photos from our guests along with our show notes. And please join us on Facebook at the B&H Photography Podcast group, where you can share your favorite photos and comment about the show. I'm your host, Derek Fosbender. Jill Waterman is our creative producer. Episodes are recorded, mixed, and edited by technical producer Mike Weinstein, and our executive producer is Richard Stevens. On behalf of us all, thank you so much for tuning in today.
Thanks to Logitech for sponsoring this week's episode.